All right, Justin Rowe talking Michigan football. There you see it, Stadium and Main podcast. Please join him right there. So this expansion talk is crazy. If Texas and Oklahoma could join the SEC in a silo and it not impact anything else, then it's still an enormous story. But the dominoes have to fall, or if everybody else stays pat, the SEC goes from being the best conference in college football at some gap. I don't know. I think I don't think it's super substantial, but I think it's a decided. I don't think it's an argument. Then they go from there to potentially just running the sport and having a ridiculous advantage over the Big Ten and everyone else. And I think most college football observers would agree that the Big Ten, not that it's every single year, but is the second best conference and has been for quite some time. The Big Ten football side, those football brains want to keep up. The academia, they've got other thoughts in mind in terms of how do we appease them but maintain our standards and do. And the Big Ten is traditionally and historically been a conservative conference, not doing crazy, outlandish things. We have heard crazy and outlandish things, though, in the last week about what could happen. And Justin, for the first time, I think that, and I've been through these things several times, and obviously 10 years ago we had Texas A&M, Nebraska, Colorado, on and on and on, but it all seemed to fit, like geographically made sense and so forth, and you could see it, and Nebraska was pretty much, and now Texas A&M, the biggest power brokers in that, and it affected college football, but we're talking about like historic, massive kind of realignment that's being forecasted by many.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you take Texas, which, we all know Texas and Michigan kind of line up where they are gigantic brands that just haven't gotten it done over the past 2 decades at this point. But it doesn't matter. When the money is there, that does have a big impact. And so, Oklahoma's in the same boat down there where they do have a big brand as well, but they also have one. So, even like you said, just with those 2 teams, it does impact everything a lot. And I thought a couple different things. In my mind, I actually don't see Texas and Oklahoma doing great in the SEC and having it impact and say, okay, Oklahoma is now going to be the number 2 team in the SEC, and that's how they're going to get 2 teams into the playoff, or 3 teams when it goes 12 or whatever that is. But I do think that when you put, Bama beating Texas and Bama beating Oklahoma on their resume rather than Bama beating Vanderbilt, that's when it makes a difference. Or maybe it's that second or third team in the SEC that beats those teams, and then all of a sudden their resume, is better than the top team in the Big Ten or the number 2 team in the Big Ten. Even if they're 10-2 in the SEC, an 11-1 team maybe in the Big Ten doesn't go. So there's a lot of implications there. And then, I definitely think there's the snowball effect where, all right, the Big Ten's now scheming. We've heard all the rumors, and the ACC scheming, and all these conferences are saying, hey, we got to make a chess move back, right? We got to figure out how does the Big Ten add Kansas and Iowa State? How does the ACC add Notre Dame? Those are things that now are getting talked about. And so, how I see it is, for Michigan specifically, Michigan has power. They may not have been, like I said, they may not be winning at the highest level right now. There's still a number, probably between Notre Dame, Texas, and Michigan. Those are the top 3 brands in all of college athletics as a whole, not even just football. So when you put that to, up against some other things, Michigan, even though people are going to say, oh, that who cares? Ohio State comes out of the Big Ten every year. They still hold the cards. And so if somebody were to come calling and the SEC said, hey, we want Michigan, Michigan could say, we need a lot in order to come down there. We need our own, division. We need our own this and that. It could, I don't know what will happen of that, but I just think that Michigan has a lot of power that people don't realize just because they haven't seen the wins come.
So the most conservative forecast seems to be, aside from, of course, the Big Ten just standing still and not doing anything would be, yes, acquiring those two Big 12 teams, Iowa State and Kansas. That seems to be the most logical geographically, and obviously picking from what's left of the Big Eight. But now we're hearing just, again, all sorts of crazy things about whether it's just Ohio State or just Michigan or some kind of grouping of Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State joining the SEC, or the Big Ten and the ACC teaming up. And, you're talking about 28 schools. So then they're either some just massive conference, or they're ditching off and just dissing their low-hanging fruit and just letting the Rutgers and Wake Forest of the world just go for football sake. And then I've heard the Big Ten going out to LA and grabbing USC and UCLA and just pulling them across the country. And that's got to be just a football move. That's not going to be like an all sports move where we've got women's soccer teams traveling from Los Angeles to New York City to play Rutgers on a regular basis. It just can't be.
Well,
so,
I think
it's crazy.
To your point there too, with the traveling, I think who this expansion hurts that people aren't realizing either is the fans that love to travel and go to an away football game, or, want to, like, I don't come across USC fans in my life here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. That's not a fun rivalry for me, because I don't get, like, I get to see Ohio State and Michigan State and Indiana fans and, Purdue fans. I get to see those people on a somewhat regular basis, and it makes the life of a fan of college football or college athletics fun, because there's back and forth. Think about going to Indianapolis for whether it's the Big Ten basketball tournament or the Big Ten football championship. That gets taken away if you expand and go to the West Coast, or even if you do pick up more teams like an Iowa State and Kansas. That's right now, Iowa's probably the longest trip, Iowa and Penn State for Michigan. And so, when you think about that, I think it hurts the fans. And that's where I think it sucks for a lot of people out there who used to go to a few away games a year, or they used to, they want to, or for the parents of the families of the players as well. Now, all of a sudden, instead of going to every game, you can only go to half, because half of them are, $1,000 plane ticket away instead over to California. So I think that the impact is not just in, all right, who are you going to play on a regular basis? What does that mean money-wise? What does that mean for your game plan? What does that mean for how you can win the conference? It's more than that in the fandom and what it looks like in terms of, how it all plays out. And so I just see that, college football is not going to be anything that we know it in give 5 years. And so maybe 5 to 10, maybe it's actually more than that. I don't know. But right now, with the two big things of name, image, likeness, and then conference expansion, it just seems like the college football or college athletics is just going to be something very different, whether it be good or bad.
The other damage that I think we're leading toward is the complete deterioration of the culture of college football. So when you watch football on Sunday, you're watching the best athletes, you're watching the very best. And that's why you watch it, is because they're so good. Because sure, Jacksonville and New Orleans and Atlanta are in the South, but they all play in generic billion-dollar palaces. There's no feel vibe that's any different from watching Seattle, Atlanta, the New York Jets, anywhere in the country. It's an NFL stadium with NFL players. There's not that tailgating. I know there's tailgating at NFL games. That's not the point, but there's not that tailgating, cheerleader, bands, mascots feel that I think goes back to the culture of that particular region. Big Ten football feels different than SEC football, than Big 12 football, than even when it was relevant. I know people disregard the Pac-12, but shoot, I grew up in the 80s, and the Pac-12 was arguably the best conference in the nation for a long, long time. So let's not discount it. That, I'd watch Ohio State and Michigan play on a gloomy November day when it was 28 degrees, and then USC and UCLA would play right after, and suddenly it's 78 and say it was just everything's a different feel based on weather, food preferences, music, the culture, the values of that region just bled into the football.
Yeah.
And it became one, and it was recognizable. And there's an inherent rooting interest because of your region. And now you might as well just name these super conferences, conference 1, 2, and 3, and 4. If you've got Clemson in the same, if you've got Ohio State and Michigan in the SEC, and all this other crazy stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think in the NFL they call it bear weather, right? For anybody, or if you're going up to Lambeau in December, it's like the Packers play better at home there because they take on that identity. And Big Ten is just like that. And I've seen a ton of fans out there and media accounts and say and all that say, hey, if we go into a 12-game or 12-team playoff and there are some home games out of that schedule, I would love for an SEC team in the middle of December or January come up to East Lansing, come up to Ann Arbor, come up to Columbus, and I would love to watch them play in that type of weather. And I think that is like a fan having in the media and the teams and the players having pride in, hey, we're tougher than you are. That's what the Big Ten is about, right? You can have all your glam at USC and have it be 78 and sunny and sit on the beach. You can go down to Alabama where it's still 70 at the going into October. But when you come up to Michigan, when you come up to Ohio and Indiana and Illinois, you better bring your parka. You better gear up, because we're not wearing sleeves and we're proud of it. And we're going to be tougher than you. We would love to have you come in and try and play us on our home turf in that type of atmosphere.
Justin, I was watching SEC Media Days, and they brought up on campus playoff games, and they were seriously discussing it as this is unreasonable because who's going to play? Like there was a health risk of teams going to Madison, Wisconsin in December or January and playing a playoff game. Like they weren't kidding. They were serious. And I was like, do you ever watch an NFL game? An NFL playoff game?
I remember I went to an Michigan at Iowa game probably 6-7 years ago. And the real feel was like -13 or something like that. It was one of the coldest games. It was one of the last games of the year. And guess what? Not a single lineman out there was wearing sleeves, even the ones that were sitting on the bench. And so, we play in it up here. We're ready for it. And so that's where, I agree with you. All of a sudden you bring in a different team. You bring in USC to try and come play here at Michigan. It better be in September because they're going to have a bad time come later in the year.
No, I think the Big Ten might do what they did. It seemed like they did to Nebraska, Rutgers, and Maryland on those first schedules. It seemed like they kind of loaded up on the good teams just to kind of prove their point and give them their indoctrination into the Big Ten. So hopefully USC and UCLA get hammered with road games in November to Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that would be awesome. And I truly think, that would be, there's a Big Ten SEC rivalry out there for sure, right? And so I think that would be, music to every Big Ten fan's ears for an SEC team to somehow have to come up here and play at that time in November, December. And maybe it doesn't make a difference, but I think that they would get a feeling for, when it's snowing in November for the Michigan-Ohio State game and I'm still out there tailgating and I'm still, in the game and I'll just gear up. That's the feeling of Big Ten football, and that's why we love it.
Let's also understand on the flip side, to give a little credit where credit is due, if you look at a roster, take Michigan, Ohio State, go through the Big Ten, the roster, find your players from Florida, Georgia, Texas, they acclimate, they do fine. Yep.
That's true. There are plenty of them, right? Obviously they have a good chunk from Michigan and Ohio in the Midwest, but some of their best players are from down south or out west, and they figure it out. They don't say, "Oh, coach, it's too cold. I can't practice. I'm gonna get frostbite." That's not a thing. So it is.
At least we don't hear those stories come out.
Yeah. it is laughable that they would be seriously talking about the health risks because of the cold here as a Big Ten fan up here.
These same guys are going to be playing in the NFL like in 2 years after that and going to Green Bay and New England in December and January. All right, good stuff from Justin Rowe, Stadium and Main podcast. There you see it right there on the banner. Please follow him on Twitter and his Stadium and Main podcast. All right, Justin, always a good time. Have a good rest of your week.
All right, thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.